The story you're about to hear was carefully written for this channel, shaped with a science fiction voice beyond classic patterns. A journey awaits you. The hall was quieter than Marcus expected, the kind of quiet that hummed faintly through the bones rather than the ears. Pale light flowed from the ceiling in slow, deliberate pulses, as if the architecture itself needed time to think before illuminating the next moment. Marcus stood at the center of the chamber with his hands clasped behind his back, trying very hard not to look like someone who had once tripped over an untranslated funerary slab on Mars. Queen Veyara sat upon a low, curved throne, grown rather than built, its surface smooth like polished stone that remembered being alive. She looked human at first glance. Dark eyes, composed expression, posture sharpened by centuries of tradition, but her long ears swept back in elegant arcs, marking her as Thessian beyond doubt. They were still now angled slightly outward, a neutral position, Marcus had been told. Neutral in royal terms meant unpredictable. The translator stood to her right, slim, severe, already annoyed. That, Marcus thought, was universal. Veyara inclined her head, a precise movement measured in degrees rather than emotion, and spoke. Varesh nai tesikara ellen. Marcus did not think before answering. His mouth moved the way it always did when confronted with structure begging to be completed. Varesh nai elun tesikara morai, he replied, warmth slipping naturally into the cadence. The silence that followed was not architectural, it was alive. The translator's pupils dilated. Veyara's ears snapped rigid, lifting a fraction of an inch as if pulled by invisible threads. Somewhere far above them, a harmonic in the ceiling lights flickered out of rhythm. Marcus blinked. Was that informal? He asked in trade standard, suddenly aware that every Thessian in the chamber was staring at him as though he had just greeted the queen by her childhood nickname. The translator found his voice first, though it cracked slightly on the way out. Your Majesty, he said, not taking his eyes off Marcus. The human responded in Old Thessian. Veyara did not look at the translator. Her gaze remained fixed on Marcus, searching his face as though it might rearrange itself into something more sensible if she stared long enough. That is not possible, she said calmly, and then repeated it in Old Thessian, slower. That is not possible. Marcus scratched the side of his nose, an old nervous habit. I mean, he said, it usually isn't, but the grammar was clear, and your vowel compression on Theskara suggested a ceremonial register, so I thought, stop, the translator said weakly. Veyara raised a single finger. The translator stopped. She leaned forward slightly. Human Marcus, she said, reverting to trade standard with visible effort. How do you know the forgotten tongue? Marcus exhaled, relieved to be asked something he could at least attempt to explain. I decode dead languages, he said. It's sort of my thing. Lost scripts, half-burned archives, marginal notes everyone else thinks are shopping lists. A few years ago, we found pre-expansion human records with recurring linguistic anomalies, patterns. They match Thessian fragment data better than they matched any known human proto-language. Her ears twitched. Not neutral anymore. So I rebuilt it, Marcus continued, warming to the topic despite the circumstances. Not the whole thing. No one ever gets the whole thing, but enough to speak it. Think of it like linguistic archaeology, only with fewer curses carved into tomb walls. Usually, the translator made a strangled sound. Veyara rose from her throne. The motion was unhurried, but the chamber seemed to adjust around her, light and shadow subtly reshaping themselves. She stepped down until she stood directly in front of Marcus, close enough that he could see faint silver markings along the edges of her ears, symbols woven into flesh by tradition or technology, he wasn't sure which. You did not repeat memorized phrases, she said softly. You replied, you adjusted, you understood intent. Marcus smiled helplessly. I corrected your tense, actually, respectfully. For a heartbeat, Marcus was certain he had misjudged the situation beyond recovery. Then, to his astonishment, Veyara let out a short, incredulous breath that might have been a laugh if history were kinder. 1,000 years, she said half to herself. 1,000 years, and a human corrects my grammar. Her expression hardened again, but something had shifted. Curiosity, sharp and dangerous, edged its way into her voice. If what you say is true, then your species touched ours long before first contact. Or, Marcus offered, we learned from the same teacher. The lights dimmed imperceptibly. Far away, something ancient listened. The translator finally found enough courage to speak. Your Majesty, he said, this is heresy. Veyara did not look away from Marcus. No, she replied, it is archaeology. Marcus learned very quickly that being historically impossible came with paperwork. The room he was escorted into after the audience chamber was smaller, angular, and aggressively efficient. The walls were matte white, interrupted only by thin seams of light that shifted position every few seconds, as if the room were quietly reorganizing itself to stay entertained. A field shimmered briefly behind the door as it sealed, humming with the kind of energy that suggested it could be either a privacy measure or a very polite prison. Marcus chose not to ask. He sat at the single table in the center, hands folded again out of habit, watching the air ripple as unseen sensors passed over him. Somewhere inside the palace, systems were waking up that had not been used since their creators assumed no one alive could speak a certain set of sounds. Well, Marcus muttered, this is new. The translator entered first, without ceremony, without apology. His long ears were pulled tight against his head now, angled back in a way Marcus vaguely remembered from comparative xenobiology lectures, meant agitation, embarrassment, or the desire to strangle someone ceremonially. You humiliated me, the translator said. Marcus blinked. I corrected one suffix. You corrected Royal Old Thessian, the translator snapped, in front of the throne. Respectfully, Marcus added, I think that matters. The translator stared at him for a long moment, then exhaled slowly. Humans, he said, as if that explained several historical disasters at once. The light seams in the wall shifted again as Queen Veyara entered. This time she wore no crown. Her clothing was simpler, dark fabric woven with faint geometric patterns that rearranged themselves subtly as she moved. Her ears were no longer neutral. They angled forward now, alert, attentive, like an antenna array tuning itself. Leave us, she said. The translator hesitated. Your Majesty. Leave us, she repeated, this time in Old Thessian. The translator stiffened, eyes flicking briefly to Marcus with something dangerously close to resentment, then bowed and exited. The field sealed again. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Veyara studied Marcus as though he were an artifact that had crawled out of a dig site on its own. You are either the most valuable scholar to ever set foot on this world, she said, or the most dangerous liar. Historically, Marcus said, those categories overlap more than anyone's comfortable admitting. Her mouth twitched despite herself. She sat across from him. The table recognized her presence and projected layered holograms between them. Scrolls of fractured text, star charts, symbol clusters Marcus instantly recognized. His breath caught before he could stop it. You know these, she said. Yes, he replied softly. Or parts of them. The parts everyone told me were transcription errors. She gestured and a fragment expanded, rotating slowly. Old Thessian, she said, as preserved, incomplete, sacred, dead. Marcus leaned forward, eyes bright. It's not dead, he said. It's dormant. There's a difference. Veyara raised an eyebrow. Explain. It stopped being spoken, Marcus said, but it never stopped being structured. Languages don't rot, they fossilize, and fossils tell stories. He pointed to a recurring symbol cluster. That inflection? It's not Thessian, not originally. It follows a proto-human emotional emphasis rule. You don't even use it that way anymore. Her ears flicked, sharp and involuntary. You're saying, she said carefully, that my ancestors borrowed from yours. I'm saying, Marcus replied, that someone taught both of us. Silence stretched again, thicker this time, weighted with implication. Somewhere deep in the palace, an old system clicked fully awake, confused and faintly annoyed to find the universe still running. Veyara leaned back. If this is true, she said, then our recorded origins are incomplete. Join the club, Marcus said. We just found out our cave paintings might have footnotes. Despite herself, Veyara laughed. It was brief, surprised, and gone almost immediately, but it softened something in the room. She waved a hand, and another projection flared to life. An ancient star map. Marcus felt a chill. He had seen versions of this before, scattered across human ruins, separated by light years. These coordinates, she said, they appear in our oldest myths, a third voice, teachers, architects. Marcus nodded slowly. We have the same stories, he said. Different names, same silence at the end. Her gaze sharpened. Then why was the language forgotten? Marcus hesitated. Because speaking it does things, he said. Your security system reacted when I answered you. Mine would have too if it still worked. Veyara's ears angled outward again, uneasy. You're telling me the language itself is active. I'm telling you, Marcus said, that words can be machines if they're built that way. As if on cue, the light seams along the walls flared, then settled. A low tone pulsed through the floor, barely audible but unmistakably deliberate. Veyara stood. Then we will study it, she said, quietly. And the people who don't want you to? Marcus asked. Her smile was thin, regal, and not entirely reassuring. They will be very disappointed. Marcus leaned back in his chair, hands behind his head again. I came here for a cultural exchange, Rendhon, he said. I knew I should have packed a larger dictionary. Somewhere beyond the palace, something old listened more closely. The archive wing was older than the palace above it, and unlike the elegant, adaptive structures Marcus had seen so far, this place did not try to please anyone. The walls were rough, dark, and stubbornly unresponsive to the presence of living beings. Light came from narrow crystalline veins embedded in the stone, glowing with a steady patience that suggested they had been doing this for centuries and saw no reason to stop now. Marcus loved it immediately. This, he said, brushing his fingers just short of the wall, is what a library looks like when it doesn't trust you. Veyara walked beside him, her steps measured, her ears angled slightly forward in focus. These chambers predate my dynasty, she said. Some claim they predate the city. Of course they do, Marcus replied. All the best secrets do. They pass between towering slabs etched with symbols, some familiar, others warped by age or deliberate erasure. The air felt heavier here, not with menace but with attention, as if the archive were listening in the way a very old scholar listens, patiently, skeptically, and with a long memory for foolish statements. Marcus stopped abruptly in front of one slab. Oh, he said softly. Veyara turned. What? This, Marcus said, pointing, is a verb cluster, a living one. You don't carve those unless you expect someone to read them correctly, Veyara frowned. Our scholars believe those markings are ceremonial. Marcus squinted. Your scholars, he said gently, have never tried arguing with a dead language. Ceremonial verbs don't carry error correction protocols. As if offended by being discussed, the symbols shimmered faintly. Veyara's ears twitched. It reacted to you. Languages do that when they're bored, Marcus said, or lonely. They work slowly, carefully. Marcus spoke Old Thessian under his breath, testing cadence, stress, emotional weight. Each time he did, the archive responded, not with alarms but with subtle adjustments. Hidden seams parted, symbols sharpened. Once a panel slid aside with all the enthusiasm of a creature reluctantly waking from a nap. Veyara watched, equal parts fascination and unease. You make it seem familiar. It is, Marcus said. To me, anyway. Which is deeply upsetting if you think about it. She tilted her head. I am thinking about it. That is the problem. They reached a central chamber, circular and low-ceilinged, its walls covered in layered inscriptions that overlapped like arguments written over centuries. At the center hovered a crystalline lattice, fractured but intact enough to hum softly. Marcus whistled. Well, he said, that's not ominous at all. What is it? Veyara asked. A memory engine, Marcus replied, or something pretending to be one. These structures don't store data. They store relationships between ideas. Veyara folded her arms. You say that as though it's worse. It is, Marcus said. Data can be deleted. Relationships hold grudges. He approached cautiously and spoke a single phrase in Old Thessian, chosen not for meaning, but for politeness. The lattice brightened, threads of light weaving through it, forming patterns Marcus recognized from human ruins light years away. Veyara inhaled sharply. That pattern appears in our oldest star myths. And in our bedtime stories, Marcus said. Right around the part where the storytellers stop explaining things and start warning you not to ask questions. The lattice projected images, worlds, lines between them, symbols repeating with minor variations. Marcus's pulse quickened. Veyara, he said quietly, this isn't just language. Her voice was tight. Then what is it? It's a curriculum. Silence pressed in around them. You are suggesting, she said slowly, that our civilizations were taught. Yes, Marcus replied, and graded. For a moment neither moved. Then the lattice flickered, projecting a distorted figure. Tall, indistinct, composed of shifting geometries rather than flesh. Marcus leaned back. Okay, he said. That's new. The figure dissolved before completing its form, leaving behind a pulse that rippled through the chamber. Somewhere far above, a system chimed once, confused. Veyara's ears flattened slightly. This knowledge was sealed for a reason. Absolutely, Marcus agreed. Someone always seals the syllabus when the students start asking who wrote it. She studied him, searching his face. Are you afraid? He considered. Yes, he said, but mostly I'm annoyed. We could have skipped a lot of wars if someone had left better notes. Against her will, Veyara smiled. The lattice dimmed, retreating into dormancy, but the chamber felt changed, less asleep, more aware. As they turned to leave, Marcus glanced back once more. Just so you know, he said, languages don't wake up unless someone is still listening. Veyara's ears angled back thoughtfully as they walked out, and far beyond the archive, something ancient shifted, irritated that its lesson plan had been rediscovered. The palace began to misbehave the following morning. Marcus noticed it first when the corridor lights flickered in a pattern that felt less like a malfunction and more like hesitation. Not off, not on, thinking. The floor beneath his boots vibrated faintly, a low-frequency hum that set his teeth buzzing in a way he associated with ancient machinery, waking up and immediately regretting it. Well, he murmured. Good morning to you too. Veyara walked beside him, hands clasped behind her back, her ears angled in a position Marcus was beginning to recognize as restrained irritation. The palace does not flicker, she said. It does now, Marcus replied. That's usually the first sign something has realized it made incorrect assumptions about reality. They turned a corner and nearly collided with a pair of palace engineers, standing frozen in place, staring at a wall panel that was slowly rewriting itself. It changed language, one of them said weakly. 3 times. Veyara stopped. Into what? The engineer swallowed. Into Old Thessian, then into something older. Then it apologized. Marcus brightened. Oh, that's promising. Veyara gave him a look. That is not promising. It means the system recognizes conversational error, Marcus said, which means it was designed to be spoken to. That's practically friendly. Marcus, she said carefully, our security architecture is not supposed to be friendly. They left the engineers behind and descended deeper into the palace, toward a wing Veyara had not planned to reopen in her lifetime. The doors recognized her authority reluctantly, as though offended she still existed. Symbols flared along the frame, warnings, invocations, and one particularly passive-aggressive phrase Marcus translated silently as, authorized access does not imply wisdom. Rude, he muttered. Inside, the chamber was vast and dim, its ceiling lost in shadow. Rows of dormant constructs lined the walls, devices that were not quite machines and not quite monuments. Each bore inscriptions worn smooth by time or deliberately scarred. This wing was sealed after the silence decree, Veyara said. No one has spoken Old Thessian here since. Marcus grinned. Then I apologize in advance. He spoke one word, just one. A connective particle so basic it barely counted as language. The room responded like a held breath, finally released. Light surged along the inscriptions. The construct stirred, not activating, but acknowledging. Somewhere above them, a resonant tone sounded, deep and measured, followed by a cascade of symbols projecting into the air. Veyara's ears flattened. That tone is a summons. To what? Marcus asked. To history, she replied. The projections shifted. Star maps layered over linguistic trees, timelines braided together rather than running parallel. Marcus stepped closer, eyes darting across the data faster than any Thessian scholar could follow. Oh, he said softly. That's clever. Veyara crossed her arms. You keep saying that in moments, I would prefer you say, we are safe. This is safer than it looks, Marcus said. Dangerous things usually announce themselves with explosions. This is announcing itself with footnotes. One projection zoomed in, isolating a symbol Marcus had seen etched into human ruins on a dead moon near Jupiter. Here it was paired with a Thessian glyph of identical structure, but different stylistic flair. They didn't just teach language, Marcus said. They taught translation, between species, between concepts. Why? Veyara asked. Marcus shrugged. If you want civilizations to cooperate eventually, you start by giving them compatible metaphors. As if in response, one of the constructs activated fully. Its surface unfolded like petals, revealing a core of shifting light. A voice emerged, not spoken, but rendered directly into meaning. Access condition met. Marcus winced. I hate it when machines use capital letters. Veyara stepped forward. Identify yourself. Curriculum Node 17. Purpose. Linguistic seeding and cultural stabilization. There it was again. That word. Curriculum, Marcus echoed. Told you. The node pulsed. Query. Instructors? Present? No, Marcus said quickly. Just students. Very late ones. There was a pause long enough to feel judgmental. Query. Assessment phase required. Veyara's gaze snapped to Marcus. Assessment. Relax, he said. Worst case, it gives us a quiz. I'm excellent under academic pressure. The node projected a series of phrases, Old Thessian, proto-human, something else entirely, stacked and interwoven. Translate intent, not words. Marcus tilted his head. That's unfair. Veyara surprised him by stepping forward. She spoke, not in Old Thessian, but in modern Thessian, her voice steady. We seek understanding, not dominance. Marcus followed, answering in a reconstructed human dialect, so old it barely qualified as language. We are aware we were not the first to speak. The projections shifted. The room's hum softened. Assessment acceptable. Marcus let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. See? Group project. Veyara allowed herself a small, incredulous smile. You treat this like a puzzle. It is, Marcus said. Just one that can collapse empires if we solve it incorrectly. The node dimmed slightly. Warning, disclosure triggers external attention. Veyara's ears angled sharply. External to whom? The constructs along the wall pulsed in uneasy unison. To those who remember being forgotten. Marcus groaned. Of course it's phrased like that. The lights throughout the chamber flickered again, this time with purpose. Far beyond the palace, deep space sensors registered anomalies, ripples, alignments, quiet signals that had not been seen in recorded history. Veyara straightened. We cannot stop now. No, Marcus agreed, but we can be polite about it. She looked at him. He smiled thinly. If something ancient is listening, I'd rather it think we're interesting than threatening. As they left the chamber, the constructs settled back into watchful silence. The palace above them continued to hum, adjusting to a universe that had just become more complicated. And somewhere in the dark between stars, something noticed that a very old language was being spoken again, carefully, imperfectly, and with far too much curiosity to be ignored. By the fifth day, Marcus had stopped pretending this was a temporary assignment and begun arguing with palace staff about desk placement. I need the light source angled 5 degrees to the left, he said, gesturing at a hovering luminaire that looked deeply offended by the suggestion. If it comes straight down, the inscriptions blur. Ancient languages hate overhead lighting. The archivist assigned to supervise him stared. The light adapts automatically. Yes, Marcus replied, but it adapts emotionally. I needed to commit. Somehow the light shifted. Veyara watched from the doorway, arms folded, ears angled in mild amusement. You are restructuring my palace, and she said. I prefer cohabiting academically, Marcus said. Besides, if your ancestors didn't want this room rearranged, they shouldn't have left unfinished sentences. The chamber they now occupied had become their unofficial headquarters, halfway between archive and war room. Holographic texts hovered in dense clusters, orbiting a central projection of interwoven linguistic trees. The palace systems tolerated this only because Veyara had personally overridden 3 layers of cultural protection protocols and one deeply sarcastic warning. The consequences were already spreading. Reports arrived hourly, scholars requesting access, ministers requesting explanations, security chiefs requesting permission to pretend none of this was happening. And beyond the palace, sensor arrays were lighting up with patterns that made astrophysicists very quiet. Veyara moved closer, lowering her voice. The council is restless. Understandable, Marcus said. I get twitchy when my origin story develops footnotes too. She didn't smile this time. They fear what this means. That Thessians were not singular. Marcus nodded. Humans went through that phase too. We called it Tuesday. He highlighted a section of text, isolating a passage written in Old Thessian, but structured like early human ceremonial speech. This isn't borrowing, he said. It's inheritance. Veyara studied it, her ears slowly angling back. If our language was shaped by another, she said, then so was our thought. And if thought was shaped, Marcus added, then so was conflict, cooperation, the idea of royalty itself. She exhaled. You dismantle empires with grammar. I dismantle assumptions, Marcus said. Empires just tend to be standing underneath them. A chime sounded, not from the palace system, but from the lattice they had sealed days ago. Soft, insistent. Marcus grimaced. That's not great. The lattice projection flared to life, bypassing every security filter they had painstakingly installed. Symbols cascaded, resolving into a familiar configuration. Secondary observers detected. Veyara straightened. Observers. Marcus leaned back. You know how you tell students the test is private, and then someone peeks over the divider? Her gaze sharpened. Who? The lattice pulsed. Descendant systems, autonomous, non-instructional. Well, Marcus said, that's ominously vague. The air in the chamber grew colder as a new signal threaded into the projection. Not a voice, a presence, calculating, curious. Veyara's hand went to the ceremonial blade at her side out of reflex. They are listening. Yes, Marcus agreed, and they're very disappointed we skipped ahead. The signal sharpened, resolving into a structured query aimed directly at the language lattice. Curriculum status, compromised. Marcus muttered, told you not to unlock the bonus content. Veyara shot him a look. Focus. He did. He stepped forward and spoke. Not Old Thessian, not human, but a hybrid phrase stitched together on instinct. A greeting layered with caution and intent. The signal paused. Unauthorized synthesis detected. Marcus smiled faintly. That's academic for interesting. The presence receded slightly, not gone, but reassessing. Veyara lowered her blade. You did not translate. You negotiated. That's what language is when it grows up, Marcus said. Translation is polite guessing. This is conversation. The lattice dimmed, but the warning remained, etched into the air like a scar. Veyara turned away, pacing slowly. The council will demand containment. Of course they will, Marcus said. They always do. It's very comforting to believe history can be boxed. And you, she said, stopping, will be blamed. Marcus shrugged. I get blamed for things that haven't happened yet. This would just be efficient. She studied him for a long moment. You could leave. Claim ignorance. Let us bury this again. He met her gaze. And let someone else decide what we're allowed to remember? No. Besides, he added lightly, I've already annoyed at least 3 ancient systems. Walking away now would be rude. Despite everything, Veyara laughed. A quiet, genuine sound that echoed faintly off the chamber walls. Then we proceed, she said. Yes, Marcus replied. Carefully, loudly, and preferably with better lighting. Beyond the palace, the stars shifted, subtle alignments forming paths that had not been walked in millennia. The observers waited. The students continued reading, and the forgotten language, once buried for safety, kept doing what it had always done best, connecting things that were never meant to stay separate. The summons arrived without drama, which Marcus immediately distrusted. No alarms, no flashing lights, just a subtle reorientation of the palace corridors, as if the building had quietly decided that walking straight was overrated. Marcus followed Veyara through a passage he was reasonably certain had not existed the day before, its walls lined with translucent panels that displayed nothing until they passed, then filled with softly scrolling symbols that faded again behind them. They're showing us what we already know, Marcus said. Veyara glanced sideways. That is unsettlingly specific. Ancient systems love efficiency, he replied. Why scare someone when you can simply remind them? The passage opened into a chamber that felt less like a room and more like an idea someone had tried very hard to make architectural. The floor was not solid so much as convincing, and the ceiling showed a slow rotation of stars that Marcus recognized from no known sky. At the center hovered a structure composed of interlocking rings, each inscribed with language fragments that rearranged themselves continuously. Veyara stopped short, her ears angled outward, not fear, but something like reverence. This is not in our records. No, Marcus agreed. It's in the margins. As if acknowledging the observation, the ring slowed. A presence pressed gently against Marcus's awareness, not invasive, but attentive, like a professor waiting to see if you would answer your own question. Primary contact acknowledged. Marcus sighed. I was hoping for a name, designation, facilitator class node. Of course it is, he muttered. Never just, hello. Veyara stepped forward, spine straight, voice calm. You seeded our civilizations. Affirmative. And you shaped our language. Language is shape. Marcus tilted his head. That's a bit circular. Intent was circular. He grinned despite himself. Okay, I like this one. The ring shifted again, projecting layered histories. Thessian worlds in their infancy, early human settlements, both marked with identical conceptual anchors. Not technology, not biology, words, metaphors, structures of thought. You didn't create us, Veyara said slowly. You guided us. Guidance reduces chaos. And free will? Marcus asked. Encouraged. Messy. Educational. Marcus laughed softly. That tracks. The presence seemed to focus on him then, the projection narrowing. Unexpected variable identified. Me? Marcus asked. I get that a lot. Linguistic convergence occurring ahead of schedule. Veyara's gaze sharpened. Schedule! The rings paused. For the first time there was hesitation. Curriculum interrupted. Marcus folded his arms. By what? By observers who prefer silence over synthesis. Descendants, Marcus said. The ones who don't teach anymore. Correct. Veyara's ears flattened. They seek to erase this. They seek to preserve outcomes. Marcus snorted. That's a fancy way of saying control. The presence did not deny it. A new projection appeared. Possible futures branching outward like fractures in glass. Some led to cooperation, shared histories, mutual recognition. Others collapsed into isolation, suspicion, and quiet extinction. Veyara's voice was steady, but her hands clenched. You would have let us destroy ourselves. Self-destruction is a data point. Marcus leaned forward. You're saying we were an experiment. You were a question. He considered that. And now? The rings brightened. Now you are an answer. The chamber trembled, just slightly. Somewhere far away, something noticed that a conclusion was being drafted. Veyara met Marcus's eyes. They will come. Yes, he said, and they'll be very unhappy we read ahead. The presence dimmed. Choice remains yours. Speak and attract attention. Fall silent and become forgotten. Marcus rubbed his temples. No pressure. Veyara straightened. We will not be silent. Marcus smiled, tired but genuine. Good. Silence is terrible for linguistics. As they turned to leave, the ring slowed, then stilled. Note added to record. Students exceeded expectations. Marcus paused. Do we get extra credit? There was no answer, but for a moment, the stars overhead aligned into something that might have been amusement. They walked back into a palace that felt smaller now, not because it had changed, but because their understanding had grown. Outside, deep space arrays continued to register anomalies, signals aligning, paths reopening, watchers shifting their attention. History was no longer asleep, and the language that had once been buried for safety was now being spoken carefully, imperfectly, and with enough humor to make the universe just a little nervous. The broadcast chamber had been designed for ceremonies, not confessions. Its walls curved inward in a way that encouraged voices to carry and secrets to regret being spoken. Above, the starfield projection had been stripped of ornamentation, reduced to raw positional data. No myths, no labels, just light and distance. Marcus stood at the center beside Veyara, feeling oddly calm for someone about to explain to two civilizations that their origin stories had footnotes written by someone else. Well, he said quietly, at least they gave us a nice room. Veyara glanced at him, her long ears angled forward, steady. You are remarkably composed. Marcus shrugged. I used to panic when a translation didn't make sense. After this week, existential destabilization barely cracks the top 5. The chamber chimed. The council nodes came online one by one. Thessian elders, scholars, military observers. Human representatives flickered into place moments later, their delay already sparking several diplomatic notes that would be written very sternly and read by no one. Veyara stepped forward first. We will speak plainly, she said, because the language we rediscovered does not tolerate evasion. That got their attention. Marcus followed, activating the lattice interface with a phrase he no longer needed to think about. The projection bloomed, not aggressively, but patiently, like a teacher waiting for silence. He spoke in Old Thessian, then translated, not word for word, but meaning to meaning. The room listened. He told them about the language that wasn't dead, about the curriculum, about the third voice that had taught without ruling, shaped without owning. He showed them the shared structures, the mirrored metaphors, the places where human and Thessian thought finished each other's sentences across millennia. There was outrage, predictably, fear, also predictable. A brief argument over whether this technically violated 3 separate sovereignty accords that had never imagined this scenario. Marcus waited. He had learned that silence, when used intentionally, was not absence. It was punctuation. When it settled, he spoke again, this time in trade standard. We weren't diminished by this, he said. We were connected, and we still are. The only difference is that now we know why certain words feel familiar when they shouldn't. One of the Thessian elders leaned forward. And the observers. Yes, Marcus said. They exist. They prefer quiet endings. We prefer honest ones. Veyara took over then, her voice steady, royal, unmistakably hers. We will not erase this again. Not for comfort, not for control. The lattice pulsed once, softly. Beyond the chamber, the observers listened. They did not intervene. Not yet. Perhaps they never would. Perhaps this was the final lesson. The broadcast ended not with applause, but with something better. Questions. Later, much later, the palace was quiet again. The kind of quiet that came after decisions. Marcus stood on a balcony, overlooking the city, watching lights ripple through streets that suddenly felt older and younger at the same time. Veyara joined him, her presence no longer startling. Just there. You could stay, she said. I know, Marcus replied. And part of me wants to, but humans will need translators too. Apparently we've been misreading ourselves. She smiled faintly. You arrived as a scholar, and I'm leaving as... What exactly? She considered. A bridge. Marcus laughed. I was hoping for something less architectural. She met his gaze. You spoke when silence was easier. That changes a person. He thought about that, about the man who had arrived eager to decode symbols, and the one standing here now, comfortable speaking into uncertainty. He had stopped treating language like a puzzle and started treating it like a responsibility. That forgotten language, he said. It's not forgotten anymore. No, Veyara agreed. It is shared. A final message flickered briefly in the air between them. Not words, just alignment. A quiet acknowledgement. Somewhere ancient systems powered down, satisfied. Others adjusted their models. Marcus extended his hand, human and unremarkable. Veyara took it without hesitation, Thessian and entirely herself. For what it's worth, he said, this has been the strangest field assignment of my career. She smiled. For us, it is the beginning of a corrected sentence. Above them, the stars held their positions, indifferent but no longer distant. History had been spoken aloud, carefully, imperfectly, and with just enough humor to survive the telling. And that, Marcus thought, was how languages were meant to be used.